This is going to be somewhere in between a normal first impressions video and a full review. I still need to wait for the DLC to come out and give the game some time to digest for a full review. That said, I've done a full playthrough and a New Game Plus playthrough of the game, and I have a lot of thoughts about the game now that I have. So I messed around with a lot of mods in Tartarus for New Game Plus, so if you see something weird in the background, or you see something that doesn't look quite right, or you don't remember from the game, like a character costume or something, just try to ignore it. It's probably just a mod. Since the game came out fairly recently, I'll timestamp everything, so if you don't want it to be spoiled on certain things like the overall plot or social links, you can skip over those sections. Or if you're only interested in my take on those sections, you can skip to that stuff. The video is also ordered so the more spoilery and in-depth discussions are deeper in the video before looping around to the collector's edition and some final thoughts. So starting with graphics. For this section, I should note that I'm playing the Steam version on a mid-tier PC. I can run it with all settings set to max, and I usually do, but boy does my PC fan whine about it a lot. To be fair, this might have been because I needed to replace the thermal paste and thermal pads on my GPU, which I did do partway through playing the game, but even then, it still feels like not the most optimized game. At one point during New Game Plus, I had massive slowdown and jank issues on my stream. This turned out to be because my shader cache got dumped, likely due to my driver's auto updating, and it was trying to recompile them while I was also streaming. If something like this happens to you, let the game run for a bit and it should eventually recompile things in the background. Regardless, when it comes to the actual updating of the visuals, especially around town, the amount of attention to the little details, especially in the dorm, is amazing. Like, the telephone and lamps have cords that actually run into the wall. The new lighting system is also really nice, and it looks really good in the spring and summer when the trees are full of leaves. The reflections and how it handles windows are also great, and all of this without a bunch of loading screens in the school or on the stairs at the strip mall. That said, since this is a remake of a PS2 game, it does show its age in the layout of its areas. They're all very boxy. Like, the original P3 has a style in the overworld that I've heard it described as like a dollhouse or something. The characters almost look like toys in like a diorama or something, and to a certain extent that's not wrong. To be clear, most video games segment areas into boxes. That way it's easier to decide what needs to be loaded in and what doesn't when you're running around large areas, or even smaller areas with a lot going on. But here you can see all the edges of those disconnected boxes you travel to via fancy menu and animation. That said, this is more of a problem because of the remake being accurate to the source material to a fault. It's just something I noticed when I was playing through the game this time around. Speaking of animation, I just want to shout out how good the animations are in this game. To be fair, they had to be, as they were trying to replicate a level of expressiveness and emotion found in the original 2D animations for some of the cutscenes. But little things like people hanging out in the dorm and eating food, and how well they adapted some of those cutscenes from the original are amazing. Although I do question why they chose to adapt certain animated scenes over others, but I'll touch on that in a bit more in the story sections to avoid spoilers here. So music is something that's a little hard to judge, where with the graphics I can talk about new lighting systems and attention to detail. Music is more subjective, so I'll give you my subjective opinion. I think most of the new music is great, and generally an improvement on the original. I think the new school exam music is a bit too busy, but this is a problem I personally have with a lot of remastering of music, where they feel the need to add on new elements, and it can kind of take away from the original melody's simplicity, I feel. The other big gripe I have is with the Iwatodai dorm music. It's good that they changed the lyrics, as the original were mildly inappropriate for a high school's dorm. However, I wish they had kept the same melody from the original. However, but the vocals and other elements of the original were pulled from a fairly popular 2000s sound library, so it's understandable that they decided to completely redo it, and there may have been some sort of like legal concerns over whether they were able to still use certain aspects of that, so I can understand why they decided to redo it. Actually, no, don't say anything about the legal concern stuff, because I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know anything about that. I haven't looked into it. So another subjective topic is the new English VAs. I can't speak to the Japanese VAs, other than it's fun to hear Bebe speak in Japanese. It's great that all the social links got voice acting, and I'm consistently impressed by the amount of voice acting there is in this game, especially for the main cast. Not only are their Link episodes voiced, but so are their nightly hangouts and group study sessions. Even the Social Link characters get some extra voice acting with the Kyoto trip and the scene of them cleaning up the school festival. I think the Social Links whose voice acting stood out the most and really improved the Social Links were
So
the
then
Strength.
I went to ask about it after class, and you know what happened? Miss Miyahara just wouldn't stop talking. She wrote out some weird math formula and said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" All it did was make me more confused than I originally was. Guess I'll have to go ask again tomorrow.
By
Moon.
the way, you're a second year, right? So you're 1 year below me. It kind of feels like I have a younger brother now. Well, would you want to be my younger brother? You do sort of look like him. No, that's impossible. Whew, I knew this would happen. I always get hungry if I think about the past too hard. And I just filled up on that beef bowl, too. Better stay true to form and keep eating, huh? Here's to a healthy appetite courtesy of remembering the past. The old memory rewind. All right, now in reverse. Let's moonwalk. What are you doing? You're my royal guard. You have to join me. Now do as I do. Moonwalk into Umiushi.
Intemperate.
If I put in my greatest effort, I will achieve the greatest outcome. One needle, one soul. This is my subate, my everything.
The main cast is a bit of a mixed bag. However, let's start with the good. Fuka has massively improved in delivery. I've always had a lot of sympathy for the original voice actor as I've listened to hundreds of Fuka's lines, even the unused ones in the original game. She hands down had the most dialogue out of any of the characters. However, I still find the put-on softness of the new voice a little off-putting. There was one of her Social Links at the mall where I noticed the VA kind of let this slip for one of the lines, and it felt a lot more natural to me. But I guess that's the kind of voice she was instructed to do, so it's not on the VA, I think. She's kind of stuck with a choice that was made over a decade ago by now. Most of the rest of the main cast is fine. It is funny that the new MCVA is so tapped into internet and meme culture, with him being the voice behind that old goblin meme. Junpei sounds good. Some of Yukari's unnecessary harshness has been sanded off, and Mitsuru sounds pretty good as well. However, I think the two big disappointments for me were Akihiko and Aigis. Akihiko sounds way too deep for his age, and it's really awkward when his original VA is right there as a police officer. They honestly probably should have swapped roles. I guess they wanted a fully new cast for the most part so as not to make things awkward and bringing back only one or two members to reprise their roles. I guess sounds fine, but the new VA didn't carry over the speech quirk from the original to make her sound more robotic. In the original, there was more of a progression to how she spoke, becoming more and more human. This new performance sounds more like Alexa than a robot. More flat and calm rather than segmenting sentences and clear enunciation of words you'd expect from a robot. Also, the VA seemed to not get the memo that "I comprehend" is basically Aigis' catchphrase and should have had emphasis placed upon it, and it should be pronounced similarly each time. So let's get into my bread and butter, the RPG gameplay. So starting out with boss rebalancing, it seems all the full moon bosses have been buffed, which is good. The Tartarus bosses were always much harder than them in the original game. This was probably because they were choke points for completing the plot, and if they were too hard, you could potentially softlock yourself by saving right before a boss. This has been alleviated by the rewind function a little bit, so you can rewind back a day or two if you get stuck on a boss, and you can just grind in Tartarus and then try the boss again. Speaking of, a lot of work went into reworking Tartarus. Design-wise alone, the blocks now look radically different from each other. A lot of new mechanics were added, such as the healing clocks, locked treasure chests, monad doors, and the clocks that let you give levels to underleveled party members. I find the gameplay additions to be a bit underwhelming. Firstly, the healing clocks and locked treasure chests. Both require Twilight Fragments, which are hard to find at the start of the game, requiring you to weigh healing your party versus unlocking more chests. And that's it. There's nothing else to spend shards on. There's no structure to scan the next couple of floors by paying shards. You don't have to pay to return to the first floor via one-way teleporter. and you can't spend shards to temporarily increase drop rates from enemies or skip floors. You can only heal your party and open treasure chests. It's such a wasted opportunity. The whole system feels so impotent. It feels like the only reason they decided to make healing clocks was to keep the now superfluous clock at the base of Tartarus that you could save at in the original game. Technically, the original game toyed around with a similar idea. There used to be a device at the bottom of Tartarus where you could pay money to be healed, but didn't make it into the final release, and you just automatically get healed when returning to the entrance in the final release. So why didn't they just do that? Make the clocks work on money. You could even leave the locked chests and shards, but just make the shards rare. Speaking of money though, oh boy, alright. Maybe it's because I was playing on hard, but money is such a pain in the early game. They kept the Persona 3 portable system of selling a bunch of junk to make up for the fact that sword cards now just give you skill cards instead of random equipment you could sell for money in the original. But why not just give us money instead? Why do I have to leave Tartarus to go sell all my junk to get money? You can still have drop items, but they should be gems for the antique store. Then just have coin cards work like XP cards and increase the amount of yen you're getting per battle. It's not like Elizabeth has any requests that make you farm out X amount of drop items like there were in P4. It's possible that the breakables in Tartarus were meant to help with the money issues, but they generally slow down the pace of climbing Tartarus and feel out of place. It feels like they ported the idea from Persona 5 without considering how it would affect the flow of climbing Tartarus, and as a band-aid for some of the money issues. In Persona 5, you could use the third eye ability to tell which breakables had something inside, and you could ignore the other ones. There was also a limited amount of hand-placed ones inside of a dungeon, rather than an infinite amount of randomly spawning ones inside a constantly changing dungeon with 200 plus floors. This adds to the feeling that Tartarus takes much longer to climb now. There are a lot of things that contribute to this, from longer battles due to longer animations, new animations that play every time you open a chest, larger floors that take longer to run across, getting teleported back down to the first floor when using a level clock, having party members asked to scout ahead randomly after battles, and stopping to clear out monad doors on the way up. Even for me, who didn't get tired of Tartarus and Persona 3 Fez or Persona 3 Portable after hundreds and hundreds of hours, literally like probably about 500 hours, I've probably spent about a good 300 hours of my life in Tartarus alone, easily, just between Persona 3 Fez and Persona 3 Portable. I started to get sick of Tartarus on New Game Plus. Part of that, of course, is there's very little challenge in New Game Plus, and I had just done all of Tartarus not that long ago, but I could feel how long everything was taking, even only using the MC and ignoring any locked chests, which cuts down on some of the dialogue and animations that otherwise slow down the pace. One other thing that was really disappointing was the lack of a proper 7th block being Monad as an unlockable dungeon like the original. Originally, Monad was unlocked by finishing Elizabeth's quest to defeat the Reaper. It was a recoloring of the first block, and the super boss fight was located on the final floor once it was unlocked. It contained high-level enemies and high-level loot. I was really hyped seeing the Monad doors, as I wanted to see what a full dungeon of that would look like. Sadly, I was informed by chat about halfway through the game that I hadn't made it into this version of the game, which it really needed in my opinion, because the best thing about Monad is that it was available from the start of New Game Plus. This provided a place to level up party members quickly, earn lots of money, and work on collecting rare materials from the start of New Game Plus. Now you have to play through 90% of the game again to start working on collecting things in January and New Game Plus. This is especially annoying given how the rebalancing of the antique store means that the base materials for the best equipment is randomly obtained from chests in January in the final block of Tartarus, with a guaranteed 3, count them 3, from bosses and quest rewards per playthrough. Meanwhile, you'll need a minimum of 12 to fully kit out the minimum of a 4-party team. If you want to give everyone the best equipment at one time, you'll need 20 total, not counting hard items that you have to farm out, not counting any of the jewels you have to farm out, and because chests and floors only respawn on leaving entering Tartarus now, this means going to Tartarus over and over again in January and clearing out the final block, hoping to get lucky that one specific type of chest spawns with one specific type of material in it. There's also a set of rank 13 skill cards that are only available from an Arcana burst on the final day in the game in the section that opens up on that day. That would have been another great thing to include in Monad. Overall, the additions to Tartarus don't solve the fundamental issues with Tartarus. They don't present interesting choices of resource management in the shards, and they drag down the pace of climbing it, while also making the endgame grind even more of a chore than it was in the original game. All right, let's talk about something else. Okay, I'm starting to get worked up here. Let's talk about 3G skills for a minute, okay? So they are the biggest new gameplay addition. Both fusion skills and Orgia mode have been reworked into this mechanic. While all the bosses feel stronger, it's probably in response to this mechanic. And even then, I don't think it was enough. They're just too strong for the fact that you can store them between fights. They can allow you to nuke most random enemies, and a lot of the monad and floor bosses since they can ignore resistances. That said, if you couldn't carry it over but the gauge filled faster, it'd probably be relatively more balanced, even though it's just free damage every few turns, or another overpowered ability that you just get every few turns or whatever. I think challenge runs on merciless difficulty and ignoring this mechanic will actually be fairly difficult though, even for veteran players. Especially if you decide to go full old school with it and turn off party control, so. But RPG stuff is only half the gameplay, so let's talk about some of the social stuff. There are a couple of small changes, like the part-time jobs from Persona 3 Portable, or being able to donate money during the day for more and more academics. But the biggest change was the massive buff given to the restaurants. Unlike in the original, you can now eat there at night, making them easier and cheaper versions of the arcade games, which used to be the fastest way to level up social stats. Especially for the restaurant that raises academics, as that one used to be overcrowded any week before exams because all the students were trying to eat there. The only other consistently worthwhile way to level up social stats is to work at Chagall Cafe in the early game, as it nets you some decent money early on and you get a point in both charm and courage. This makes social stats fairly easy to max out, especially since you also get points for doing things with party members at night. Although, having said that, it would have been better if the secret menu items gave you a +3 to a stat instead of a +2. The only +3 I've seen in the game is one from studying with party members, or when getting a buff from that almost useless Major Arcana card that gives you a +1 to your next social stat raised. Having social stats be so easy to raise has just made it more clear to me that the major crunch for getting social links done has always been the amount of days you have to hang out with school social links. The amount of days that aren't available are just egregious. I'm currently doing some research on the actual numbers for the original version of Persona 3 for another video, and the room for error even on New Game Plus playthroughs is just horrendous. But again, this is just due to it being a faithful remake of the first time the system was implemented, but I do wish they had found ways to soften this problem. Moving on to new mechanics that were added, the only one that has a real impact on social links and social stats is the computer you can use in the lobby of the dorm. If I remember correctly, that computer in the original was there, but it was only really used by some of the other dorm members like Mitsuru or Fuka sometimes. In this game, you can buy programs or links to interesting websites that you can spend a time slot on and get some new points towards a social stat, increase max HP, SP, reveal new shopping options, unlock some new mechanics for Tartarus, or do a reading thinking about a person to get a couple more points towards their social link in the late game. This is very similar to the book mechanics in Persona 4 and Persona 5. It's a pretty good reworking of it to not redesign the dorm, so you have a personal bookshelf or something. Although given that there's already a bookstore in the game, and you can read with some of the party members, I feel like they could have made it work if they wanted to. While most of the websites unlock new things and are interesting, most of the programs from the Net Cafe feel mostly superfluous. The social stat increasing ones aren't any better or cheaper than just eating at the appropriate restaurant. You can do them whenever, but the restaurants are only closed on like one day a week at night, so the use case is very niche. Also, there's no reward either in-game or as an achievement for finishing them all, which is kind of disappointing. One other little quibble I have though, and again, it's another small thing, but something I noticed is because it becomes much more easier to ambush enemies in Tartarus once you have read or, used all of the programs. I stopped hearing mass destruction outside of the monad bosses for the rest of the game once I had all those done, because it just became so easy to ambush enemies. Again, just a little quibble, but it kind of speaks to how easy it is to ambush enemies in this version of the game after a certain point. The most interesting change that could be made is if the max HP and SP books could be bought infinitely, especially since SP and HP no longer max out at level 99, so it would be more like the temple or gym in Persona 5. In fact, I thought the unused rooms at the end of the left side of the first floor hallway of the school, down by the faculty office and stuff, I thought those were going to end up being versions of that for some reason. I don't know, I just looked at the doors there and they had descriptions. I was like, oh, this seems like a good spot, or like something like that would be a good spot for having an equivalent of the gym or temple from Persona 5. But that ended up not being the case. Having the programs infinitely available would also get the player another thing to work on in the endgame at night or on New Game Plus, as both are rather sparse once all the social stats are maxed out and the night social links are done. Overall, I like how they recontextualize book reading, but it feels very underdeveloped, and there are a few easy changes that could have been made to make it a bit more of an interesting system. Moving on from gameplay, let's talk a little bit of story. So, social links. The biggest change has been the new voice acting for all the social links, obviously. The English VAs did a good job overall. Two standouts are Yuko's VA and the Moon social link. There have been some tweaks to the scripts and wording, but most of the changes have been for the female social links, as now you don't have to date the girls by default. This means mostly rewriting the ranks where the MC automatically starts dating the girls and including new dialogue for ranks 9 and 10 for the friend zone route. A good example of this is Chihiro's rank 5. Spoilers for rank 5 of Chihiro, social link by the way. In the original, this is where you started dating her, and she talked about how she keeps thinking about the MC and has dreams about him. In Reload, it's been toned down where she asks in a roundabout way if her feelings are love or not.
Looking over her homework, that kind of thing. She even told me that lately, she can't stop thinking about him. So I was wondering, is she in love right now?
However, the second half of physical contact is still the same, and trying to go for a kiss is still a reversal of the social link.
Oh, your hand.
Some of the dialogue hasn't been changed, and doesn't make as much sense on a just friends route, but overall the social links are as good or as bad as they were originally. Although I will say the Moon social link is a lot more bearable, as the English VA makes it more clear it's supposed to have a more comical tone compared to some of the other social links in the game. It still sticks out like a sore thumb, but between that and what I believe to be minor rewrites, it's a lot more tolerable. I'd have to go back through and look at the script side by side to see like what changes were made, and some things could just be like relocalizing the game. Like maybe some awkward translations, things were lost in translation in the original. The change of making dating start at rank 9 also has the unintended negative consequence of making gifting almost completely useless. In the original game, you could give a gift while on a date for some bonus points towards the next rank of your social link. But since you now start dating at rank 9, there's a very short window to be invited out on a date before finishing the social link. This could be part of the reason why growing plants on the roof was added to the game, as otherwise the flower shop becomes almost completely useless. Things like this are likely part of the reason why gifting didn't make a return in Persona 4, and when it returned in Persona 5, it was reworked to be an option during normal hangouts between ranks. Moving on from social links, let's talk about Strega a little bit. Strega's always been kinda bad. Like, not in the they're so evil way, but more in the what idiots way. My biggest problem has always been not their position, but their complete inability to defend it coherently. I don't fault Jin for this, he's just being loyal to the man who gave him purpose in life. But Takaya is really bad at making convincing arguments, which is also a problem considering that he's supposed to start and lead a cult towards the end of the game. This is a problem I have with the Persona 4 main antagonist as well, but maybe I'm expecting too much from these games. However, given how deeply rooted in psychology and philosophy the SMT and Persona series are, and given their more mature themes and fan bases, I would like to see the villains have a logically consistent way of thinking and acting. That's another problem with Strega. Despite being so serious all the time, they act like cartoon villains. They lock us in a boss fight, preach about not caring about their own lives, just to run away to fight another day, and then let a valuable member like Chidori act alone and get captured. Speaking of Chidori, she's always felt very separated from the other two. It's never been clear to me why she hangs out with them other than also being survivors of the failed experiment, and she's not devoted to Takaya like Jin is, and never really speaks to them on screen outside of the scene where she's introduced and the scene where she's unintroduced. All in all, Strega's made better here, but without a rewriting of some of the plot beats, it's hard to make them truly threatening or interesting antagonists. Speaking of the plot beats, let's talk about the overall plot. While I've complained a lot about various gameplay elements of this game, I don't have any new complaints when it comes to the story. They attempted to make Strega a bit more interesting with mixed results, but I still appreciate the overall game of the story. I cried at the end of the game like I did a few years ago when playing the original for the first time, so they're doing something right. Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, I'm just...
It'll be okay.
I'll save the full discussion of Persona 3's plot for another day, but suffice to say, I think that the story it has works the best with the gameplay out of any of the mainline Persona games. The fact that death is such a present force in the game and how it reminds you that there's only so much time left in the game is really fitting, even more so because in both the original and this remake, it's very hard, almost impossible to finish all the social links on the first playthrough. You can't do everything because you only have so much time, and no matter how much or how little you do, the game will end eventually. Now that I'm done opining on how great the story is, can I just rant about something for like 10 seconds here? How did they choose which cutscenes should be reanimated versus in-game? For the most part, that makes sense, but there's something that's been really meriting my Karen. Why did you not animate the Awakening cutscene, but animate the beach scene? Like, I know why, but it's so frustrating. The in-game cutscenes of the girls in the original were fine. But they specifically chose to make that 2D animated, but decided not to reanimate one of the coolest and best cutscenes of the whole game. It's a tragedy and an insult. I can see a world in which it makes sense because they wanted to prove the in-game cutscenes could be good, but it just isn't the same. Not anywhere close.
20 minutes later.
So, because I'm an idiot, I bought both the physical and digital collector's edition. Like and subscribe, by the way, guys. I'm not monetized. And I can say for sure that buying the digital version was a terrible experience. The two biggest selling points of the digital edition were the art book and the soundtrack. Both are already features built into Steam. There are plenty of other games I have which have a soundtrack or an art book associated with them, and you can just download them through Steam. They're in a separate category in your Steam library, and if you sift through the files of your Steam install location, you can copy-paste them wherever you want. They're yours. You paid for them, right? Instead of doing that, for Persona 3 Reload, they are DRM. They are separate programs you can choose when launching Persona 3 Reload instead of the base game. Most of the art book was already seen images used in promotional material for the game. It's very bare bones. Don't worry though, if you wanted to get the actual song files, you could buy the soundtrack. Again! Or, you know, you could sail the high seas because you already bought the game. Not that I would know anything about that. Overall, both versions of the collector's edition were not great, but the physical is definitely better. As for the pre-order bonus stuff with the DLC for P4, that was limited time. Like, they just put out as DLC, like, later, from what I can tell. So you didn't really get anything in particular for pre-ordering the digital collector's edition. At least you got a statue with the physical, and, like, the soundtrack came on actual CDs and stuff. Speaking of DLC, the DLC personas are ridiculously broken. Again, to the point I think the next video is going to be all about them. So I won't talk too much here about that other than to say that Kasumi's personas are the most broken. So if you want to buy those, buy the two Persona 5 DLC sets. As for the outfits and music, I like the school uniforms, but the Phantom Thieves outfits just look kinda weird to me. Maybe it's the masks. I don't know, it just, something about putting those costumes onto other characters that they weren't originally designed for just looks a little off to me. Another complaint I have is about the P4 school outfits. Why aren't they wearing glasses? It's something I didn't even think about until I saw a mod that added it on Game Banana. Link in the description to that mod. But it looks really good, and it's a fun way to see what everyone would look like with glasses. Even the overlay when choosing skills looks really good with it being outlined in white. And it helps outline their faces so they're not just blobs when you're selecting skills. As for the music, it's fine. There are some odd choices, like Throw Away Your Mask from the third semester boss fight music from Persona 5 Royal. I think the worst thing is that the music player A can't make playlists, so you just randomly get boss music if you turn on shuffle while fighting like random enemies. And it also means you can't just shuffle all of the P4 or P5 music. And B, why is it in gameplay settings instead of music? That menu is already cluttered enough, while the sound setting menu is pretty open and would have been a better place to put it. You could even save players some menuing by just having it below the default options instead of being a separate menu. There's just so many annoying things about something that should be a relatively easy quality of life feature, and you can't unlock any music by beating the game or anything, so you have to pay to unlock this feature, and it's kind of an annoying one to use. Wait, I just thought of this. Why not finally give a use to the record store in Polonia Mall and have it sell music? Then you could unlock some of the songs and play them in Tartarus or something. Even the original game lets you have Fuka swap out the Tartarus music for Persona 1 and Persona 2 and some SMT music. It's really a disappointingly missed opportunity. Maybe I'll start a donation goal and we can pay a modder to make that a reality someday. So, final thoughts. Is this a replacement for the original Persona 3 Fez? Mostly. We'll wait and see what the answer is like when that comes out. Is this the definitive edition we were hoping it would be? No, it's not. But it is the version I'll likely recommend to friends who want to play the game. Unless they're short on money, then I'll recommend emulating one of the two previous versions. I think the attention to detail in updating the graphics and in recreating the original game is commendable, but I think the changes don't go far enough to make it feel fresh compared to the other versions. And it's not the definitive edition that combines all the content from previous versions. Is it worth $70 USD? No, I don't think so. This is a subjective thing because money's different for everybody, but I think for most people it's probably closer to a $40 to $50 game. Maybe if the answer was included from the start or it included FemC and all of that content, like if it was the definitive edition. But unless you're a big fan of the series, I'd probably wait till it goes on sale or just try it on Game Pass. Final score, 8 out of 10. Well, that's about everything I have to say about this game for now. Let me know what you thought about the game, or if you think I missed something in the comments. For the next big video, I think I want to delve deeper into the DLC personas of this game and talk about them and why there hasn't been a best Persona of Persona 5 Royal video after, the Persona 3 and Persona 4 one did so well. If you're watching this around the time it came out, I'm likely currently on holiday with my family, so no streams this weekend. But next weekend, we'll start a modded Persona 5 challenge playthrough, so look forward to that. Anyway, I hope you guys all have a great day, and in case I don't see ya, hope you have a good afternoon, good evening, and good night.